Let's get kicked off. And I'd like to come to each of you in turn. Meggie, we'll start with you. From where you sit, why is it so important that the government hears directly from the tech sector?
Yes, well, from an operator's perspective, you just touched on this earlier. The pace of change is really quite extraordinary right now, and it's one of the most consequential tech shifts that we've seen really in generations. Almost, I hear a lot about this comparison to transformations like the Industrial Revolution. And Clio, is one of those companies where reshaping legal tech AI and reshaping how law firms are operating, how services are delivered, et cetera. And so, tech companies are in the trenches. They're seeing these shifts, these technological shifts in real time. And we know and we see the kind of synergies that these shifts can have. And when it's supported by really strong policy from the government that can really accelerate this adoption, where really outdated frameworks can that I think sometimes the government tends to have, can really slow progress. And so direct engagement really helps, when you have a government design directly from whether it's the provincial government or federal government, it can really shape, what's happening on the ground. And really, at the end of the day, Jill, if we want to be competitive, and where the transformation is happening right now, the government really needs to be in the trenches with the companies and supporting us.
Thank you. That's really well said, Maggie. Let's turn to Andrew. From your perspective, why is it important for government to hear from tech?
I came to this adventure in my retirement because I'm drawn to an industry that doesn't particularly rely on government to keep it going. I would have probably answered this question differently before I started working here and said, I don't know that it is that important. The government, I'm sure, has the best intentions and will do their best not to shoot us in the foot as we're trying to grow. What I've found is that the government's balancing multiple priorities and trying to do the right thing by a whole diverse group of people, and they wind up shooting us in the foot sometimes, and they are very upset when we cry out. And so I think there does need to be a kind of communication where we can alert them to things that they're doing that will have an unintended consequence on us as an industry and as companies. And I have found them to be incredibly receptive to that when it happens. I immediately turn to the how can we do it? Because I don't really want to lobby or call them and tell them what's going on in my life these days, and I don't think they want to get those calls. So, if I may, I'm going to take this opportunity to endorse BC Tech's recommendation that there be a council and that the tech be given an opportunity to voice those things and, frankly, hold them accountable for what can we do to help you either get out of your way or actually proactively help you. That seems like a constructive suggestion to me because I do think it is important that they hear what the industry has to say and what the individual companies have to say. And all of us have to be grown up and say, we realize you can't give us everything you want, but at least hear us out on what we need and what impact your decisions are having on us.
Yeah, I mean, if anyone in government is listening, I promise you this will not be a group of people whining and complaining. It will be a group of people who are so ambitious for British Columbia and keen and who can see solutions and can offer solutions and ideas to help you with your problems. And honestly, it will be the best part of your day. But over to you, Kiersten. Let's hear from you. Why do you think it's so important that government hears from tech?
Well, Jill, I'm just going to build a little bit on what you just said. It's like, I think we're very much aligned with government in the sense that we want to see the economy grow. We want to see an innovation economy. We want to see, for that innovation economy, you actually need to make sure that your tech sector is growing and really your domestic tech sector. So, when we look at prosperous countries in the world, they're countries that have developed a strong innovation economy. We could look to Switzerland or to Denmark, or of course to the United States. All have economies driven by knowledge and technology. And these are countries that have really been building their intangible assets like intellectual property and data. And these are countries that have integrated tech into their traditional economic sectors like manufacturing and resource development. So we know that government is focusing, of course, on resource development, focusing on growing the economy. And, at Council of Canadian Innovators, we talk a lot about, well, how can we actually make sure that we are growing an innovation economy within some of these very traditional economic frameworks? So, what is the best way to grow an innovation economy? What industrial policies do we need to look at? How can we play on our strengths and grow our intangible assets and keep those intangible assets in Canada? And for government to develop these industrial policies in conversation with Canadian innovators is really important. In our Mandate to Innovate, which was our policy book that we released earlier this year, we did advise setting up an independent, nonpartisan advisory council would be helpful. So to your point, Jill, establishing a Premier's Tech Council, which would, as you said, tap into that energy. Where are those ideas to grow the innovation economy? What do our innovators need to scale up and to build? We think that would be a great way to further that dialogue and further that collaboration. So, in short, it's important for government to hear directly from domestic innovators what they need to better access capital and customers and talent in order to scale up, to compete globally, and to grow BC's innovation economy.
Thank you. That's really, really well said. Oh, you're all hired. You're all hired as advocates for this council. I want to just reinforce Meggie's point from earlier. It's so important to be working on a current framework of how the economy actually works and what is leading to growth, and not to be working on outdated frameworks. And that's a real benefit I always find of working with tech companies. It really keeps me on my toes. You can't be using last year's thinking, never mind last decade or last century, which, now that I come to think of it, is 26 years ago now. But anyway, so I wanted to do a bit of a drill into capital, because this comes up all the time. It's a key input for the sector. So you have to have funds in order to invest, in order to grow. And when we think about capital, let me come to each of you in turn and ask where the government can be most effective in supporting the tech sector on capital. And Andrew, for this one, we'll come to you first.
Okay. Well, absolutely no doubt. Money is required to drive startup businesses. I'm going to indulge in a 8-second advertisement for Svante. We're the largest company in Vancouver you've never heard of, private company in South Burnaby. We have a factory in the Glen Lyon complex. We've spent $130 million building the world's first factory for manufacturing carbon capture filters. And all we need now is customers. But we knew customers weren't going to build one of our machines unless we had the factory to build all the replacement parts. So we're here working on that. We've raised $650 million over the course of our life. And the Canadian government, all levels, are responsible for 70 million of that. Not counting a $100 million commitment from CGF. Sometimes we think of them as government, sometimes we think of them as private sector, but you could include that. And that compares to $165 million we've gotten from US, all levels of government. So we don't rely on the Canadian government to fund our affairs, but we also would like them to not put up roadblocks. So we built a factory that builds clean tech equipment. There's a federal tax credit for clean tech equipment. We don't qualify. I'm not going to lobby about that. Happy to, if anyone wants to call me offline, I'll explain exactly what I'm talking about. But the key thing for me is, and on the poll question, I asked the provincial government help us deal with the federal government. I get it that when we call any level of government and say you've got a tax program that we should qualify for and you should include us, we're going to sound like everyone else who's calling and asking for money or asking for a project. We actually think we should qualify for this. And I think the provincial government would be helpful for us. And I'll just compare us to our most immediate geographic neighbor who's getting strong provincial support for provincial initiatives. That seems like an obscure way of presenting what's going on in the geographic neighbor next to us. I would love for our provincial government to understand us and tell us, look, you don't qualify or you're not a compelling case, and this is why, but we'll make sure we use what leverage we can to get an audience. I'd like to see that sort of collaboration. I don't think the Canadian government, all levels, can outfund the rest of the world.
Mhm.
But I do want them to recognize that that's what they're up against, is that we would have gotten an additional $50 million of support towards a $135 million factory if we built it 40 kilometers south.
Boy, yeah, I did not undersell when I said your anecdotes were strong, Andrew. That is a very compelling example of where government can help and hinder accidentally, we hope, and that they can help you argue on your behalf with the federal government. Meggie, let's turn to you and hear, where do you think the government can be most effective on this capital question?
Well, I think it's important when you look at it that when you're having government support, capital for companies, that it's really the time horizons is over the long term and not just the short term, not just a one-off support. Many firms, many startups or what have you, mid-sized companies still face constant pressure to relocate to larger markets, such as San Francisco. It happened to us at Clio, earlier on in our journey, and we were very intentional. We chose to stay in BC, and we really believed in the talent here, the ambition, and the potential to be, for BC to be a global tech hub. And but for some companies, they don't have, smaller nature of that luxury, and there's so much pressure there because of the capital, being more accessible in locations such as San Francisco. I do want to still highlight, and for many folks maybe here from the government, I do want to highlight though, even, however, would call out that faster processes, clear pathways, and less really cutting down that red tape can unlock growth just as much as direct capital as well. So I want to make sure that we don't forget that too.
I think that's really important. It's maybe something that isn't so well understood in government is that time is money. And taking 8 months to get to a yes instead of 8 days to get to any yes can actually be the difference between something proceeding and not proceeding at all because the opportunity has evaporated.
Exactly.
Kiersten, let's come to you. Why do you think it's important, and where do you think government can be effective on the capital question?
Well, I'm almost going to turn back to your poll at the beginning of our webinar here, where we were saying that where we heard from the participants that buying Canadian it would be a really great way. So I thought I would talk a little bit about government procurement as a really effective lever to really put capital and access to new customers, really offering those opportunities for our rapidly scaling up innovators. It's a great way. A great example, for example, is our public healthcare system. With so many of our tax dollars going towards healthcare, and we have such great innovation here in British Columbia from the med tech and from other health services space, from the health tech space, I should say. These are companies that are already selling to other governments, into the United States, selling in Europe, even to other provinces, but seem to really struggle to sell here in British Columbia. So, at CCI, we've been long saying that, a service contract with government procurement is far more effective than a grant or a tax credit in helping our innovators scale up. And when you sell to your home government, it sends a positive signal to other governments, allowing innovators to access new markets, new customers. And you know what? I do think that, government understands that and agrees. But what we do hear back is that it's complex. It's really, really difficult. It's difficult to make some reform or to modernize procurement. But we do, at the end of the day, think that it would really give great value. And a time where government doesn't have a lot of extra funds for grants or new programs, that just, by reforming procurement, it's a great way of really letting those funds, getting those funds into the hands of our innovators.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say too, we think the integrated marketplace is a really great program. It's great to de-risk innovation and to open up new customers. But we really have, I think of our members here in British Columbia, who are rapidly scaling up and already competing globally. They're sort of beyond the integrated marketplace. And so, we really have to be thinking about, it's not a program, it's really just modernizing government procurement. understanding that buying from domestic innovators, it strengthens our innovation economy. It's going to require some modifications to develop a culture that is decisive and moves quickly and embraces homegrown innovation. But we think in the end, it's really a great way of unlocking capital.
That's really good. I mean, we all love people in lab coats, okay? But we need to love people who've actually developed marketable products and are selling them successfully globally. And we need to show our love for that by buying their products. It's amazing how often I will hear from people that it's so much easier to sell to American customers or European customers or Asian customers than it is to sell to Canadian customers. In fact, I have never come across anyone who says it's easier to sell to a Canadian customer than it is to sell to someone from overseas. And that seems to me to be extreme. We're unique. We're the only place in the world where that is true. And it can be changed. So thank you very much for that call to action. So capital is important. Customers, of course, are king. And talent. Yeah, talent today is less of a volume game than it was a couple of years ago, but it's still really important that we attract the key talent from around the world to strengthen our economy, to strengthen our tech companies. So when we think about that, what's the reality today? What is it like for companies who are trying to attract and retain and preserve the jobs of high quality people here in BC? Meggie, can we start with you? Your team has grown incredibly in the last few years. Tell us how you think about talent today.
Well, talent, truly, it's the single most important input for a scaling successful tech company, like full stop. Access to those skilled people determines how fast we can grow and execute and innovate. And again, the pace has just gone up exponentially here. And so I think government can play a really important role in strengthening the talent pipeline here through the right education, training, and partnerships that really align to the modern tech roles now. And you talked about the volume, which I totally agree with, and I think now it's more of less volume, but specialized skills are important, especially in areas like AI and cybersecurity. And when these companies scale with this strong talent, it really creates long-term economic impact. It amplifies this impact. More jobs, more people building careers in BC, and more of these residents contributing to the local economy. It's so key.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so important for the strength of the economy, not just the strength of the tech companies. Andrew, tell us a bit about your experience on talent.
Sure. And you set it up, so I'll knock it off the tee that I have an anecdote. We're a very diverse workforce. We have 275 people working for us, over half of whom are engineers or higher education graduates. I don't know how many of those people had permanent residency before they joined us, but a significant portion of our workforce is from another country. I can tell you that 38 people currently working for us when they joined us did not have their permanent residency cards, but we're seeking them post enrollment. So they're here on work visas. Of those, 16 have gotten their permanent residency while working for us. So this is not going to be a monologue about the importance of immigration. And in the poll earlier, I didn't say helping immigrants come work in BC was an important government initiative. What is an important government initiative is not changing the rules. Mm-hmm. In the fall of 2024, a very important employee to us cleared the points hurdle. So they were in line for their permanent residency card, and we all knew the date that the next group was going to be admitted. And this poor soul went out and signed a contract to purchase and sale to buy a house in Vancouver, his family's new home. And then there was a political move to change the immigration rules, and they moved the goalposts. As a result, the price of the home went up by 20% because as a foreign buyer, you have to pay the property transfer tax, and in order to effect the transfer, you have to pay 20% of the value of the property of the home on top of that. This was a crisis beyond belief for this individual, and as a result for our company, because they were an important person. So you go into full court press mode, and the CEO and I wind up having calls. Huge kudos to the government officials that we reached out to. They all took our call. They all had people engaged. We were talking to the tax department about special waivers. We were talking to the immigration department about bending the rules or grandfathering people. None of which brought us any relief. And so we had to, as a company, construct compensation package that enabled this person not to lose the deposit on that they'd already paid for the home, or to have to foot the bill for the 20% additional cost. There's a happy ending. He cleared the next point hurdle and has received his PR, and we are now fighting for a refund of the 20%, which is available to foreign home buyers if they get their PR within a year of paying it. But it was a pretty clear idea, and I the problem with speaking in anecdotes is I don't say some things that Meggie said, but she said them, so I just want to pile on. Like, just avoiding red tape is helpful. Creating crises is really unhelpful, and if the government doesn't want to have immigration, no problem. We'll source our workforce differently, staff our workforce internationally, do whatever we need to do. But if you give us tools like an immigration policy that encourages people in lab coats to come to Canada, then don't pull the carpet out from under us after we bring them here, because it's disastrous. The disaster recovery team at the government is excellent. Avoiding disasters would be better.
Boy, that is a really powerful anecdote, I think, on a bunch of levels. I mean, it is really important to remember that there's real human beings at the other end of these rules and these changes. And you can just imagine the roller coaster that person went through. But I guess with my harder heart, I also want to hope that the government heard the more quietly stated part of your answer, which is not that Svante changes its global ambitions, and not that if Svante doesn't create these jobs, it's that they're created outside of Canada. If you make it too difficult for them to be created inside Canada, the companies will continue to grow and continue to have the ambition. What we will lose out on is having these amazing people in our communities, as parents at our schools, and as taxpayers that are funding our health and education systems. That is what we will lose out on. And it's a real tragedy as we try to build Canadian-based, Canadian headquartered, Canadian staffed companies if Canada becomes unreliable in terms of rule changes. So really, really helpful. You are living up to the press, Andrew. Well done. Kiersten, what do you have to contribute on this topic of talent?
Well, I thought I would bring in a perspective of one of our members. And just to say, too, we can see, obviously talent is really important for all of our innovators scaling up. And we could even see, looking at BC's economic plan, Look West, there's the intention of growing thousands of more tech jobs. And while, BC is home to great talent, for many innovators to grow in BC, they do need access to international talent. And so one of our members, a recruiter, and really does do a lot of recruiting for tech companies here in BC, was sharing with me that, you need a special license here in BC to do that recruiting. It's a BC recruiter's license. It's a very simple document, but you basically need that to recruit international talent. It's a document needed here in British Columbia. No other province actually has this document, so it's something somewhat unique. The license is supposed to take only 2 weeks to process, but in his experience, he says, it takes more like 4 months, even sometimes 5 months to get that license. And so every time you have those delays, then that talent can't come to British Columbia. And without that talent coming to British Columbia, you have that person then not making the income. Government is losing then revenue from that income. And also there may be some frustration where that talent may not come to BC in the end and may go to another province that doesn't have the same administrative processes or let's just say burdensome processes, quite frankly. So when we're talking about reducing red tape, what can government easily do without really spending any money to really accelerate the economy, bring in talent, really support the tech sector? This is sort of one suggestion that we have been sharing with the province, and we hope to see it change.
Thank you. Okay, some very actionable steps there. So thank you for that. I think you're living up to our reputation for being solutions oriented. Let's sort of step back a bit and just think we've talked a lot about what isn't working. which is natural in any kind of panel like this. But from what you've heard from colleagues, what you hear in the community, let's talk about what is working. And you can also reinforce what isn't working in terms of how government supports the tech sector or how it could do more. So, Kiersten, let's go further with some of the stuff you were just saying. What do you hear when you talk to your members?
Well, on the one hand, in terms of what's working, we were really encouraged to see the Look West economic plan. And, in that plan, we did see that there was a priority made for AI and quantum, that, tech and innovation was obviously part of that plan. And so again, when we're thinking of, for our members, what would they like to see? And also we look at it from a policy point of view, what can government do? Again, to further grow the economy and really build that innovation economy. One thing that we have been sharing with government is, this is a great time to really help tech companies scale up by really aligning, embedding technology with a lot of their priorities. So, for example, when we see the construction of the Northwest Transmission Line, that would be a great opportunity to see government actively ensure Canadian innovation is part of the project. Or as we prioritize critical minerals, let's make sure Canadian innovation is integrated into mining exploration. There's a lot of talent here in British Columbia. Let's make sure that that it's part of that plan. But from a finance point of view, and certainly we made some suggestions to BC Budget 2026, what would make things easier, and this is sort of feedback that we've received from our members. The province could, for example, implement flow-through shares, which is one of our recommendations. And flow-through shares, it's a tax incentive that allows companies to pass on tax deductions to their investors. And you see this more with high-cost capital projects, but we have a number of innovators that are looking to build new manufacturing plants, or even, Andrew, you were talking about building, and these are very capital-intensive endeavors, and we think that flow-through shares could really be a help to the innovation sector. We also recommended that government implement an innovation patent box. And this is a way of reducing corporate tax rate on income generated from intellectual property developed through R&D. So again, this would reward our innovators that are moving towards commercialization, not just innovation, not just research, but into commercialization, which again stimulates economic growth. And like BC Tech Association, we also recommended that government increase shred credits, at the very least to match our neighbor to the east, to Alberta, increase it from 10% to 20%. And, we really do think that by implementing these policies, you are helping Canadian tech companies scale up, but really you're helping government strengthen that innovation economy, which will really give greater prosperity for all of us here in British Columbia.
That's helpful. Yeah, no, so for all the tax geeks on the line, they will be thrilled to hear you mention not just flow through shares, but patent boxes in the same answer. But I would say, it's always important to remember that none of those things are new. None of those concepts are new ideas. They've all been successfully deployed in Canada and in British Columbia for specific other industries in the past. So tech is basically saying we're the new economy. Let's use the same levers we used 20, 25 years ago to accelerate what was the most exciting part of the economy then. So before we return to our question of today, tech leaders' priorities for government, I just want to put a quick call out to our audience to say, please don't hesitate to put your questions in the chat, and I will come to some of those questions in just a moment. But to come back to my panel, I'm going to make you narrow in on one thing. You're not allowed to choose all of the above this time. So if you had one key priority, as a tech leader, if you had one key priority that you would like the government to focus on, what would it be? Andrew, let's go to you first.
Well, I said work with the feds in the poll, and I think I've spoken to that. So I'm not going to pick that again, but I am going to go off piste a little bit and say, we get it that you're operating according to an election cycle and a populist movement, and you need to do things. And so I'll say explicitly what I think any one of us would say explicitly. This isn't great courage on my part. We choose to do business in BC because it is a good place to do business. And we choose not to relocate somewhere else because we prefer what we've got here. And that's a complex balance of economic incentives, direct cash injections, the red tape portfolio, which we sometimes makes us tear our hair out, but is better than perhaps other jurisdictions in some respects. So, being the apolitical creature that I am, although I would have a preference for perhaps something more driven by capitalism and less red tape and smaller government, I would say pick your horse and then ride it. And if you're going to get into government on the basis of building stronger social programs, that's good for me as a tech entrepreneur and good for me as a British Columbian outside of my job. Other people are attracted to living in BC because of our strong social programs. So set yourself a goal, measurable, and be accountable to it. So that, I mean, trying to put a positive spin on what seems like a disaster in the States, somebody got elected because they said they were going to do things. That was found to be popular, and now they're doing it. They're going to be measured against whether or not they did the things they said they were going to do, and they were able to get reelected. I think if you set a goal, even if we don't all agree with it, if it makes BC a better place to live in whatever from whatever dimension, then you're going to find less headwinds when you try to achieve that goal. But trying to be all things to all people isn't going to work. And it's going to open us up to flailing around saying, well, I wish you would do more of this or more of that. And you're not going to get good guidance. I want to support my government in making BC an amazing place to do business, whatever that means to you. And it's my job to make that work for me and my company and my employees.
That's lovely, Andrew. Really hopeful and positive. Meggie.
Yes, I think, when I reflect on kind of where we're at Clio and what's happening in the AI space, if companies are not adopting technology at a pace or, being open-minded with new thinking, new ways to approach problems, like they're gone. They're shut down. And so I encourage, again, BC to be more innovative, to look at when you're helping the community here. Don't provide old thinking or, similar policies and expecting new outcomes. It's the environment really has shifted and everybody needs to step up to the plate. It's a huge opportunity and really be quite innovative and apply new thinking. And so really come in with that growth mindset, I think, and coming and supporting tech companies, bigger or small, I think could really be a game changer for the government.
Thank you. And Kiersten.
Well, I'll go back and talk about the innovation economy. And, we talk a lot about a value add strategy. And, to Andrew's point, asking government to pick a winner. You can't be everything everywhere to all people. Developing industrial policies that really help further tech adoption. We think is having more policies going in that direction, we think would really help grow the economy. So, when we talk about a value add strategy, it really is making sure that tech and innovation is integrated into all of our supply chains, integrated into all parts of our economy, everything from a small business owner, using AI and really using all of the tools, innovation tools to help increase business efficiencies and operations, but also thinking of large projects and making sure that we're using Canadian innovation to build those large projects, to manage those large projects. The value add strategy is just making sure that tech and innovation is embedded in every part of our economy. And by doing that, then we build our intangible assets. We are able to expand our intellectual property and our data and our knowledge. And that's ultimately what we're exporting to the world. That is ultimately what we are able to compete globally. So think big.
Beautiful. Thank you very much. We've got some wonderful questions in the chat, and I'd like to just start with one that I think is quite intriguing. What is one assumption that government makes about the tech sector that doesn't match reality? What an interesting question. Who would like to go first? What is one assumption that government makes about the tech sector that doesn't match reality?
I don't mind jumping in, or
Please.
just very briefly. I think sometimes there's an assumption that the tech sector is a standalone sector, and that it is somehow or other different and can really be differentiated from other sectors. And again, I think just building on what I had said before, that really tech is everywhere. The more we can embed tech in all aspects of our economy into our business, again, we can grow that innovation economy. So I think sometimes that's what we do run into, is this idea that tech really, every company is a tech company. It's really everywhere. It's not a standalone sector uniquely.
That's great. Meggie, you were going to say something.
Yes, I would say that it's a lot easier to get capital outside of BC. And maybe, definitely like at Clio, we're very Canadiana, we want to stay, but just even more nowadays, it's just so easy to get capital outside, and just know that, and don't assume people will just stay for the Canadiana thing. That sometimes they're just, that capital could make or break their company and their next stage of growth, and they'll go outside.
Andrew.
This is a perception question, so I'm just going to give my perception, and I could be wrong, and I hope anybody who thinks so meets me for a coffee and tells me how wrong I was. It would be my pleasure to pay. I think I'm building on what Meggie just said. I think that when you're in a leadership role in maybe any space, but certainly in the technology space, you build up a vision and then you pursue that vision with like a kind of an incredible stubbornness, probably long past the point of rationality. And then you break through to success, hopefully. I think the government doesn't appreciate just how far over the edge we are all the time. And we somehow are giving them the perception that we are supremely confident in our position and don't really need their support, but it would be nice if we had it. When the reality is, like, we're hanging by a thread. And I think it would cost them nothing to attend our events, attend a meeting with an important stakeholder, and say, as a government, we're not in the business of funding business, but we are in the business of supporting our businesses, and this is an important business. Just the moral support would be great. And I'm not really accusing anybody of not doing what needed to be done, but I think like the free support of telling everybody this company that employs 275 people in our case is a really important piece of the economy, even if we're not, just come and act like we are, because it will help us. And I get it, we raise money, our money from everywhere other than BC predominantly, and we get it, we're not getting the money from here, and we're all about that. That's been the rule. That's we knew that going in, so we're making it work with what we've got. It would be surprising, which is, I suppose, the damning, the condemnation. It would be surprising if somebody showed up and said, I don't have any money for you, but what can I do to help?
Yeah, I'm just going to let that sit there. I don't have any money for you, but what can I do to help? I can't think of when I was last asked that question. So I'd love to answer this question as well, if I may. And I would say that's the number one myth. The number one myth is that the tech sector is going to ask for money the way other sectors ask for money. In my experience, the last thing they do is ask for money. Money is not the hardest thing they do. Raising money is not the hardest thing a tech company does. It is hard. It's not the hardest thing we do. And government could usefully reframe by thinking of the tech sector as like our amazing Canadian athletes. They are results-oriented people who are going out to beat the world. No apologies, no complaints, no special pleading. We don't care if there are other countries that fund their athletes more generously than Canada does. We still think we can win that gold medal. And this community is a group of people who are out there trying, and literally all they are asking for is that the home team champions them, that their home governments cheer them on, come and watch their games, maybe buy their products, and celebrates them to the world. We will do the winning of the gold medals. We would love to have your support and your encouragement. We don't need your money. Apologies if that is more emotional than you were looking for. Let me turn to another question that I see.
By the way,
Please.
we are going to ask them for money too. I probably should have said, I realize you're going to say no, or you may say no, but we could use your help. Anyway, we have funding from NBC for which we're extremely grateful. Great shareholder, great supportive group. Like all our shareholders, I love them dearly. Speaking to the broader group, my expectation is that that's not always going to be there, and it doesn't always have to be. Was my point. Apologies for editing my comments.
But you're also you're asking for investment, and you're planning on making them disgustingly rich, which is slightly different than asking for a subsidy and a break in order to get an unfair advantage. Together we will make a lot of money and a lot of success for Canada, and we'd love to share some of that wealth with our investors. So where do we see opportunities for better coordination between the provincial and federal governments? That's a good question. So maybe we could level set, I think we have expressed that we think the cooperation could improve, or it could go even further, that there is some cooperation, but there could be more. So where are the opportunities for better coordination? Meggie, do you want to kick us off here?
Sure. Kind of, it's a cliche, but just that they talk to each other, or that there's more of that open dialogue between provincial and federal. I know. So let's even just play it in a real-time example for Clio. If you look at our solutions, where, for law firms, we work with lots of large organizations that have in-house counsel. So when you look at the legal profession in the government, it can show up from a provincial courthouse, but also at the federal level in the Ministry of Justice. But there's no dialogue, between the two. And I think there's just opportunity that when you're helping a company, the provincial and federal are partnering together and helping you in any kind of policy or mandates to help that company. You just, again, run into the red tape. There's not a lot of talking sometimes.
Yeah. And it must be harder to talk as often from British Columbia as if you were, based in downtown Toronto, right? That would be.
Exactly.
Anyone else? What are the opportunities for greater cooperation provincially and federally?
Do you know, I think what we hear from our members, first of all, Andrew, to your point, what we hear from our members, and Jill as well, you've made points in terms of just celebrating our great tech companies and just really recognizing all of the great work that our rapidly scaling up companies are doing here in Canada. And further to that, we see with the Look West economic plan, this is obviously a plan that's been kicked off really, kind of a response, I would say, to federal government priorities along economic growth. So I think that's a good sign that we do have the BC government and the federal government. There are some opportunities to work together and to strengthen the economy together. What I do hear from our members is sort of the wish for the BC government to be in Ottawa more often. And, to your point, like if you're in Toronto, very easy to get to Ottawa, or very easy to be engaging with the federal government. British Columbia, there's the physical distance. But, I think also, we're not, maybe it's something new for us to work really, really close with the federal government on joint ventures. And I think there's an opportunity for us to have a greater presence in Ottawa, to really work with Ottawa a little bit more on our economic pivots that we are now executing. And, and I think there's some really great opportunities here in British Columbia in the meantime for a lot of our innovators. So really just greater presence in Ottawa, greater willingness to work with the federal government.
Excellent. So I want to try and squeeze in one final question from the chat before we close out, because I think it's a really great reality check question. So government timelines are always long. I think that's a fair point, right? Government timelines are always going to be long. But is there a specific change the government could make now that would make a significant impact on your business? Perhaps I'd broaden it out a little bit. Is there something government should be doing now, understanding their timelines are long, that's going to definitely be a good pivot for them for the next, long time period, right? They're never going to be a quick turnaround entity, governments, they have to plan and work for the longer term. So given that their timelines are always long, is there a specific thing they should be doing now that would have a positive impact?
So I'm so passionate about this, but why does it have to be so long? Like when you look at certain things, like if there's RFP processes that are 3 years for a tech, or what have you, or funding, like tech is different, again, have new thinking, cut those timelines, think differently, or you're going to, lose out on an opportunity for some really important, impactful economic activity in BC. So I would just challenge anyone has any influence, does it have to be that long? What does a 20% decrease look like? That could be quite powerful, but yeah, just really push that new thinking. I think we would really help the tech community here.
Hey, I think that's a great challenge. Does everything have to be long, or do some things have to be long and some things have to be more nimble? Okay. Anybody else?
Well, again, I could just jump in. I'm never shy about these things. So I would just agree with Meggie, really. Like we see it so much with procurement, especially with, domestic innovators. They can't last years for a procurement process. And even within that process, you could be having new innovations even. So procurement is a great opportunity to just reduce those timelines, to make sure that your process is decisive, and that there is a clear path, there is a clear timeline and a process for innovators to follow. And then I'll go back to the BC recruiter's license. Again, the issue isn't necessarily the license itself. We do view it as a red tape issue, and that there seems to be this extra step that BC requires that other provinces don't. At the same time, if the province was adhering to a 2-week timeline, fantastic. But because it is such a long timeline, to your point earlier, Jill, time is money. And for a lot of our domestic innovators, you don't necessarily, is that where you really want to spend your extra money, is just waiting around for a decision, for an approval. And I don't think it's just the tech sector that feels this way. And we have seen the government actively cut timelines for the resource sector or for other sectors. Would love to see that focus, I would say, for the tech sector.
Fantastic. And my single word answer, procurement. You should be able to buy things, whether it's toilet paper or technology, reasonably quickly. Just because you have to do policy making more slowly does not mean you shouldn't be a good customer. So thank you so much to today's guests.